Hello there, everybody. This is Analog Hoove again, bringing you something I'm really excited to share. This is Alan Wake, American Nightmare. Mwah, scary, I know. Anyways, I was a big fan of the original Alan Wake, and it was a very interesting mix. Good storytelling, unique combat, really great setting. I love the Pacific Northwest in the first game. It takes place entirely in like the mountains and weird small towns that make up Washington. So it was just a really good game. So the story was unique, sort of had this Stephen King-ish vibe to it. Not so much scary as it is just kind of creepy and unsettling. I don't want to go into too much detail with regards to the story, because I highly recommend you play Alan Wake. It's just a really fun game through and through. And, well, I mean, the thing that really set it apart was its unique take on combat. At least in the first one, there's a sense you're always kind of outgunned. You're dealing with these people sort of possessed by this shadowy presence, so you have to burn away the brightness with your flashlight before you can actually take them out with your guns. And because of that, there's like unique combat mechanics, so like flare guns in essence being grenade launchers, flares being used to sort of hold people back, or flashbang grenades being used, they were sort of like regular grenades. But anyways, I mean, it was a just overall very unique experience. Like I said, the story was also a big draw for it. You know, sort of not your average third-person action-adventure game, definitely. So definitely try it out. This game, however, is interesting because it's not necessarily a full-scale sequel. The developers have said that this is not Alan Wake 2. And in terms of the story, it's kind of weird. It's not quite as coherent as the first one. And in fact, if you haven't played the original, it would probably be kind of hard to figure out what exactly is going on. However, I'm not 100% certain that this necessarily is a continuation of the story. They don't really make it clear as to whether the events of what's going on here is the next step in the Alan Wake saga, or if it's just kind of like a one-off, you know, sort of thing, like an episode. It's almost presented kind of like an episode of a Twilight Zone-esque show that exists within the Alan Wake universe called Night Springs. In fact, the whole premise of the game is Alan Wake is a writer, and like the creatures that he's seeing and doing battle with, and it's all sort of, you know, comes back to like his creative ability manipulating the world, because like this dark force feeds in essence on the artistic minds of people. And so he sort of learns that as a creator, yes, this dark force is sort of using him as a source of power, but he can also manipulate what's going on with it. And the thing is, as a writer, he actually got to start writing for this show called Night Springs. Like I said, very Twilight Zone-esque. And so it's sort of presented like, kind of like an episode of this, of Night Springs. But is it, like I said, is it just sort of, yeah, being done for fun, or is this really happening within everything? It's not clearly defined. I guess we'll have to wait for the like legitimate sequel to Alan Wake to figure that out. But one big difference from this is, of course, the fact that it's a downloadable title. And it's the developers do a pretty good job of really utilizing that platform surprisingly well. I mean, you can look at graphically, it looks just as good as the full retail release game, which, you know, is impressive in and of itself. Of course, there are some limitations to work with in terms of file size whenever you're doing a downloadable game. And they sort of get around that in an interesting way by sort of making the story a loop in and of itself. So you revisit the same environments multiple times, but they set it up in the story fairly well in that, you know, there's this time loop going on, and every time you go through, you're sort of figuring out all the pieces of the puzzle needed to get yourself out of the time loop. And I mean, a lot of times that can come off as lazy, But here, I think it works fairly well. I mean, sometimes, there is a matter of repetition, because sometimes you have to do the same things each time through. However, every time you go through, it becomes more streamlined, because sort of like the people you have to interact with are kind of figuring like, hey, we're reliving this too. So where you used to originally had to go fetch a bunch of items the first time through, the final time through, all the items are already prepared for you. You don't have to bother, running and hunting them down, which is pretty cool. So they handled that pretty well. Also, compared to the first game, there's a bit more of an action focus, because throughout the game, you're finding manuscripts that Alan had written, sort of defining what's going on, explaining what's going on with the story. You really need to find those and read those to get the full picture of what actually is happening, and it does do a little bit of catching up to you if you haven't played the original. But anyways, you find those, and as you find them, you unlock new guns. And the original pretty much just had a rifle, a hunting rifle, a shotgun, a couple pistols, and that was about it. This one, they have sawed-off shotguns. They have a Magnum, which is awesome. A combat shotgun, and assault rifle. You get a lot more guns this time around. And so the end result is a bit more action-focused. And also the levels are less linear than the original. In the first one, you're really just progressing from one point to another. Trying to stay one step ahead of the bad guys as you're trying to figure out what the hell's going on. This time, like each environment, you guys sort of have to run around. There's different things to do in there. But like I said, each time it's a bit more streamlined, so there's less to do, but more action going on. Because each time through, also, like, new enemies are introduced. The number of enemies increases. And, as a result of that, it's pretty well paced. You could realistically get through it in probably, an afternoon or two, just a couple sit-downs. But, there is some replayability in the fact that you can try to find all the manuscripts, which of course gets you an achievement. But they also threw in this mode, what you're seeing right here, called the arcade action mode. In essence, it's your sort of typical horde mode kind of thing. You face wave after wave after wave of enemy. Only this time, instead of just going until you die, you have to last 10 minutes until sunrise. Then the sun comes up and the sun burns away the darkness, kills all the enemies, you win. And of course, also a nice high score thing going on here. Because as you kill enemies and dodge their attacks, that's one thing that's great about this game. There's a really great dodge feature. Just push the left bumper in any direction anybody's about to hit you. You duck out of the way. Works really well. Just makes the combat really fluid. But anyways, so you pretty much rack up the multiplier, and you just go to town. Try to kill as many enemies as possible. There's an achievement for lasting the full 10 minutes without killing any enemies. That'll be fun. But, all things considered, it's a little bit, I think, above and beyond your average horde mode, simply because of the uniqueness of the combat. It just really has a feel and pacing that you just don't get from any other game. Having to stop, aim with a flashlight. Some enemies don't require it, but most do. As you can see, this dude right here, when you shine the light on for a little bit, he splits. And then you have to kill the doppelgangers. Splits again. Let's see, the game was like $15. The main story, maybe 5-6 hours, depending on how much exploration you want to do. It would have been really cool if the arcade action mode had co-op, but unfortunately it doesn't. Just like the original, it's obviously a single-player focused game. Really the only negatives to it is, if you don't like the combat, nothing you're really going to do about that. It's definitely unique. It's got its own thing going on. If you don't like it, oh well. I personally like it, so I say give it a shot. But like I said, the arcade action mode can last you quite a while if you get into it. So all things considered, it's a really good game. I'd highly recommend looking into it. It's another great title that really shows off, I think, the downloadable future of the gaming industry. Because, I mean, this, there have been worse looking games with less content released at retail for a full $60 in this game. And this gets you a beautiful looking game with plenty of unique, interesting content for only $15. I mean, how can you go wrong with that? Not to mention, I mean, if you like the original, you pretty much gotta play this one. And I say try out the original, too. Thanks for watching and listening, and have a wonderful day, people. Toodaloos.